pull requests.
Yes.
They're all, you know, looking at the source control and figuring out where the bugs are and opening issues where they need to. And everybody's just kind of doing the same sort of thing with a slightly different perspective.
But the security guys, at least for my area, are doing the AMIs, the AMA, or AMA ports, 5.
So that is important. That is the client side of security, right? And what ends up happening is that people do what they're supposed to do the weeks and months before that ANA happens, and then you go back to business as usual after you pass.
So yeah, and
Right.
ANA has come out of I mean, there's history there, right? This is a culture of kind of federal auditing, and
Yeah.
there's a guideline written, and somebody
There's an
goes and
accountant that
enforces
started this.
exactly. But I mean, modern technologies allow us to move away from this, right?
Mhm.
So if you look at a company like Chef, which is doing all the configuration management stuff,
Mhm.
they've written a tool called Inspec.
I love
Inspec,
that tool.
right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Inspec is
That's what
all
we
about
should be
how
doing.
you
Continuous
implement
monitoring.
compliance checks via software tests.
Mhm.
So you've got people who are focused on security, but they're just writing software tests that get committed to a source control or repository
Mhm.
right along with all the other code. But those tests, the output of those tests are what's performing the compliance checks for you.
Yep.
So you cover the compliance with a technical solution, right?
And the difference there is that now your compliance is continuous,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
You're not doing it the weeks before.
Yeah.
And forgetting
You're
about
always
it
doing
afterwards.
You do away
You're
with
doing
this
it all
whole
the time.
notion of like, oh well, it's that time of year where you have to go through your security because
Yes.
you're just constantly writing tests to check for the things that you need to be checked.
But you know as much as anyone that that's not an actual security compliance requirement. That's just
Yeah.
how people interpret it.
Correct.
And
That's
you
another
can
thing
be
too.
completely NIST
Yeah.
and not go every year we do an audit.
A
You
lot
can
of-
just- you do.
Yeah.
There's a reason the word is continuous monitoring. Continuous.
A lot
Sorry.
of the stuff that sorry, we
No.
need to get started.
Yeah, but not to cut you guys off, but I just want to say, let's schedule another talk with you guys actually talking about security in a
Yeah.
modern way.
No problem.
And then let's get that done.
And we need to talk about your conference idea too,
Yeah.
because I need to plug you in with Rob Powell over in the OCIO because
Cool.
he wants to do this. He wants to have
Let's
3
make it happen.
big developer conferences that'll be security centric,
Yeah.
and he wants to have them in 3 different locations, like across the agency. So like one at Ames and one at
Yeah.
Marshall, and Goddard is certainly like.
Is that what I sound
Yeah. Do I need to mute?
You guys have more
You guys
than
have
one
more than
laptop in
one
the same room. This
Yeah,
turned
that's
on.
me.
You have to make sure all of them are muted.
Okay, all right. Can you hear me on that? So I guess we won't put this on the screen. You guys already know aware of it. So we're gonna get started in a minute. Thanks everybody for coming out. You know, it was crazy weather today. I'm glad we still had an opportunity to do this today. Brad's gonna be talking to us about Code Fusion, modern Code Fusion, which is pretty cool. I know we have several groups writing Code Fusion here. In other places as well, so this would be really useful. We have, I mention all the time, we have a backlog of talks. I think everyone here is already aware of that. The next one, for the next two weeks from now, I don't think we have anything actually scheduled. My group is going to be doing a series of Git training, so we may just incorporate, and there's been questions about adding other people to that. So maybe we'll just make that the next session. It'll be a lot bigger group because it'll be including our essays and other people, but it'll be hands-on, kind of walking through using Git. That'll be a 3-part series, one then intermediate and then advanced topics at the end. So we'll probably do that if we don't have an actual speaker. We're lining up a couple of external speakers as well. I kind of mentioned that already. Talking about containers and Kubernetes, and continuous security integration as well. I think Aaron has a library out that they do chaos engineering in a security fashion. I can't remember exactly how it works, but I know that was pretty cool as well. So without further ado, I will turn it over to Brad, and he's gonna take it away. Hopefully everyone, I'll check in with those online and make sure they can actually hear and see us. So if you can have to switch over to.
So what do I need to do?
You should be good.
Okay.
I think it's, Brad, can you hear us?
I can hear you.
All right, cool. So whenever you're ready, you can take it away.
All right, so whenever I hear myself really loud, I may have to mute your mic.
Okay.
Do I need to mute?
Try muting your end.
I'd love to be able to hear you guys say stuff, but
We'll unmute for questions and such.
okay. As of right now, it's not nearly as loud. I think if you have the same mic and speakers unmuted on the same computer, it does some sort of like automatic suppression of the feedback. But if you have it on, if you have the mic on one computer and the speaker on another computer unmuted, I think that's when you get the worst feedback. All right, you guys completely muted now because I lost you. Can you hear me? Hello? I don't know if you guys are there or not anymore. Sorry. Are you guys there? Or did I lose y'all?
We can hear you.
Oh, okay.
Yep.
Here, right now, I'm not getting the feedback. So whatever mic you have unmuted right now, I think you can leave unmuted. That's what I was trying to say. But then you muted everything, so I wasn't sure if you were there or not.
Gotcha. We'll keep this one on.
Yeah, this mic seems fine. All right, any way you can push that camera down a little bit? I'm getting a lot of the ceiling and a lot of the wall and just a little bit of people's heads right now.
It's not as big as a group as normal.
We're gonna figure something. How's that?
That's good. What were you saying about the group size?
It's smaller because all the schools are closed.
Oh, is that due to weather?
Mm-hmm.
Dang. All right, that's cool.
Are you good?
We'll have a party with who's here. Yeah, great. All right, so I haven't used Google Hangouts in a long time. I usually use Zoom. Am I correctly sharing my screen or properly sharing my screen at this point?
Yeah.
What do you see?
Yeah, we can. Your prompt.
Yay!
Man prompt.
Yep.
What if I can make it bigger? Whoa.
Command.
There you go.
Almost too big. Okay, cool. All right, so this is sort of a vague topic just because I ran across Andre on Twitter talking about cold fusion and modern cold fusion stuff. And so he invited me just to come talk, but when I'd said, like, what do you want to talk about or hear about, it was kind of like everything. And I love to talk about everything. So I figured we could maybe just kind of go off questions and see what sort of things you guys wanted to cover. So first of all, Andre had told me that I got your name right, don't I? Making sure. Yeah, Andre.
Yeah, that's right.
Had told me that you guys weren't all a cold fusion group. You kind of had a mixture. So I'm kind of curious out of the people here today, how guys are cold fusion developers or have done CFML, and how many of you guys are just unrelated stuff? I guess raise your hand if you've ever done cold fusion in your life. How about that? Okay, I see a few hands. Everybody else just isn't quite enlightened, but you're about to be. Awesome.
Years ago.
That's fine. You know what? I found cold fusion is the language that like almost everybody has done at some point in time in their life. I don't know. I was just at a big Java conference called DevNexus down in Atlanta, about 2,000 people. You know, and like every other person I talked to would be like, "Oh, cold fusion, I did that, 15 years ago." Most people seem to have a warm spot in their heart. Not everyone, but a lot of people have done it at some point in their life. So, my name is Brad Wood, and I've been doing cold fusion, or CFML, as I like to say, since like, I don't know, 2000 or so. I picked it up in college when the internet was still new and you could just go buy a domain name because they hadn't all been taken at that point in time, which is how I got bradwood.com back before all the domains in the universe got registered. and I just had a static HTML site, and a friend of mine was hosting it on a server for me. And I called him one day and I said, I had this Access database, because that's the way you did everything and was Access back then. And I was like, is there any way I can get data out of this Access database and, like, you know, show it on the screen? And he said, yeah, I've got just the thing. All you need to do is rename your files from, you know, index.html to be index.cfml. And you can just put these tags, you know, right in line with your HTML, and you can run queries, you can do loops, you can do if statements. And I was like, yes, this is awesome. So that kind of started my journey with CFML, which was a long time ago. And obviously that was a very, very rudimentary way to develop in Cold Fusion. And at that time, I didn't even think there were really any CFML frameworks that existed. You know, the web was pretty new, and people just kind of would, you know, people weren't building applications, you know, on the internet. They were just building websites that had data. And so a lot of people learned CFML in that time period. And unfortunately, a lot of apps, even apps that exist to this day, are still sort of written in a very kind of legacy or just procedural, you know, mindset. You have a file, it's .cfm, you run some queries at the top, you do some if statements, you do some loops, yeah, put some HTML, you know, bada bing, there you go, there's a web page. There's a lot more that CFML can do now. It's matured quite a bit, and there's a lot of tools and frameworks. And so a lot of what I spend my time doing is just I present at a lot of CFML conferences. I don't know if any of you CF guys have ever gone to any Cold Fusion conferences. My company is doing one called Into the Box down in Houston this year, but Adobe does one. Actually, Adobe's early bird tickets just went on sale this week. They're like $99. I don't know how they make it so cheap, because they're in Vegas. Nothing's cheap in Vegas. But there's a number of Cold Fusion conferences still around. And so I do a lot of talking, just kind of trying to, you know, educate CFML developers and bring them up to speed on what some of the newer technologies are. And of course, anytime I get a chance, I talk to non-CFML developers as well. So for those of you who don't really know anything about CFML, it was created in 1995 by two brothers, the Allaire brothers, and it was owned by a company called Allaire. And 1995 was a popular year for languages. It was when Java came out. It's when JavaScript was invented, Ruby was invented, and Cold Fusion were invented. Did I miss one? PHP. Did I say PHP? PHP as well. All those languages all came out in 1995, which is pretty cool. A busy language year for the universe, I guess. A little irony is Cold Fusion is the only one of those languages in that list that I ever hear people say, wow, isn't that old? When in reality, it's the same age as a bunch of languages. And Python is even older. It came out in like '89. But I mean, I don't see old as a bad thing. I see it as a thing that means the language is more mature, as long as the language has reinvented itself and it's added, you know, new features on. COBOL is old, and I think it may have kind of stagnated, right? But CFML is possibly old, but it's reinvented itself quite a bit. So Cold Fusion was sold to Macromedia around 2000. And Macromedia, at that point in time, Cold Fusion had been written in like C++, I think. Cold Fusion wasn't written in Java when it came out, because, you know, Java was a baby as well then. So when Macromedia got a hold of Cold Fusion, they rewrote the entire thing as a JVM language to run on top of the JVM. Your CFML code direct compiles down to bytecode, runs on the JVM inside of a J2EE servlet container. And I think that's one of the best things they did to it. JVM languages weren't the cool hotness back then. In fact, the only other JVM language other than Java, obviously, to predate CFML by a little bit is probably Scala. I think it came out like maybe a year before. Nowadays, everybody loves JVM languages. They scale like crazy. You know, Twitter started on Ruby, and when they couldn't scale, they went to, I think, a lot of Groovy stuff. But still, they went to the JVM and reduced their servers by a factor of 10 to contain the same load, because the JVM scales so well. Now we have Kotlin, which is the new hotness, and Clojure, and Groovy, and Scala, all these JVM languages. And a lot of people don't even realize that CFML is actually one of the first JVM languages. So Macromedia was bought up by Adobe in about 2005. People say that Adobe mostly wanted Flash, and they kind of just, you know, other redheaded stepchildren like Cold Fusion along with the deal to buy Flash. And so Cold Fusion, Adobe Cold Fusion, has now been the official commercial product of CFML since, what is that? I mean, that's over 10 years ago now, 13 years ago. So Adobe is still actually actively developing on CFML. A lot of people are surprised to hear this. They think, you know, it died like 10 years ago. Actually, no. The current version of CFML is 2016, which would have been version 12. For some reason, they switched to the let's do the year thing. I'm guessing they probably wanted to avoid version 13 because 13 is an unlucky number. So the 13th version of Cold Fusion will be 2018, and it's actually in private beta right now, which I'm a part of that testing. And so there's been a lot of new features that have been added to CFML. It's evolved quite a bit under Adobe's direction. But alongside of this sort of progression of the commercial version of CFML, because CFML, Cold Fusion was always a commercial platform. You had to pay money for it. You had to pay a lot of money for it. Maybe not a lot. You know, people pay more for SQL Server or Oracle than they pay for Cold Fusion. But most people don't pay for programming languages, not anymore at least. Pretty much all of them are free and open source, which always sort of kept, you know, Adobe and Macromedia Cold Fusion off in the enterprise market, the corporate market, the government market. You know, PHP and CFML were about neck and neck for a while, but PHP was free, and so everybody used it, which I totally get. So there's also been several open source and free alternative engines to CFML in the same manner that Ruby also has JRuby, which is like, you know, another server that runs on the JVM but runs the same code Ruby does. CFML had OpenBlue Dragon. There was also a commercial version called Blue Dragon, which was actually written in .NET. If anybody remembers MySpace, they were written in Cold Fusion and they moved to .NET. That was actually New Atlanta's doing. They moved them over to their Blue Dragon product. There was one called Smith Project, and there was one called Rilo, which was the biggest one. Rilo was actually started by a Swiss. Oop, did somebody say something, or is that just some talking?
No, you dropped off for like a couple seconds.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I noticed the video quality went down substantially. Okay, so Rilo was started by a Swiss engineer named Misha, who I was actually chatting with just now as I started this call, as a student project. And it would take Cold Fusion code and it would transpile it to PHP and run it on a PHP server, which performed pretty horribly. And eventually he rewrote it to run on Java. And Rilo became a mainstream product around 2005, about the time Adobe was buying Cold Fusion. And it increased in popularity until about 2012, when it was forked with a new name as Lucy Server. It's basically the same team, similar to how like io.js turned into Node, or if anybody remembers Hudson for continuous integration, when that turned into Jenkins, or even MySQL now is MariaDB. You know, a project grows, it gets to a certain point, and the developers decide they kind of want to be able to break away from the existing you know, entity they're a part of and do their own thing. And so that's where Lucy Server came in back in about 2012. And so I do a lot of work with Lucy Server as well. It is free. It is LGPL 2.0 license, so it's open source. So all the code's out there on GitHub, and it basically is an alternative implementation of the same CFML language. And that's why you'll hear me say CFML more often than Cold Fusion, because even though, yes, the CF in CFML stands for, you know, Cold Fusion Markup Language, Cold Fusion is, you know, the commercial product that Adobe owns. CFML is more widely regarded as just the language. So I can write CFML and run it on the Adobe Cold Fusion server or on the open source Lucy server.
Are they feature compatible, API compatible?
Yes, exactly. So they are not 110%, but they are probably like 95% feature compatible. All of the basic stuff, the basic constructs of a language, you know, includes the math function, ifs, loops, queries, are all pretty much exactly one-to-one. The only time you get off into differences, there's really two main areas. There's either things Adobe did that everybody thought was dumb, like back in the CF11. I mean, I like Adobe, don't get me wrong, but some of the features, they're like, hey, let's try this out, they just don't go over well. So they decided to add support for writing mobile apps, right? I used it, I played with it. I actually won a little competition they had because I was only one of two people who decided to enter, you know, writing a mobile app. And they came up with the CF client concept, where all I did was they took the PhoneGap API, they wrapped it up in this, like, you know, some tags, and you could like write a mobile app using ColdFusion. But it didn't really work very well. Nobody really used it, and it basically went away. So Lucy Server decided early on they weren't going to bother trying to implement that. There's a couple very enterprisey things. Adobe ColdFusion comes shipped with the DataDirect JDBC drivers, which are a commercial product you have to pay for. Adobe comes with like a SharePoint integration. It comes with a Microsoft Exchange integration. Some of those very enterprisey features that don't have a wide market for just people that want to run a blog. Lucy Server hasn't bothered implementing some of those. So here's where the missing piece of that, it's not a really missing piece. So there are some things that, for the most part, Lucy has, well, there's actually a bit of spread. There's a few features that Lucy has. Lucy focused a bit more on developer productivity, and it tends to have a couple extra functions or some extra optional arguments that it allows in its functions that allow it to remain backwards compatible. So code somebody writes in Adobe ColdFusion can be taken and run on a Lucy server without any issue. So Lucy server is uses OSGI. I don't know if anybody knows what OSGI is. I don't know if you guys are any Java kind of developers. OSGI, you know how, well, if you ever have to add a jar file to a Java-based application, what do you have to do? You have to stop the server, you have to copy the jar into the lib folder, and you have to restart the server. And if you're on Windows, the server locks those jar files. You can't delete them or move them until you stop the server again, right? OSGI is the Java answer to that. That allows you to load and unload jar files wrapped up in something that's called a bundle on the fly. And what it also does is it separates parent class loaders. So each bundle is loaded by a separate class loader. Because one of the biggest problems of jar hell on Java is you have, 17 libraries that all want to use log4j, but they all want to use a different version of log4j, right? You can't do that in a traditional Java app or any other, JVM-based application, because, the system class loader is this big giant cesspool of classes that you just toss all of your jars into. And if you have 5 versions of log4j, well, which one gets used, right? So OSGI is sort of the solution to that. You could have multiple versions of libraries being used at the same time. So Lucy Server has implemented OSGI. It also implements some other open specifications like JSR 223, which allows any other language to run CFML through this open interface. For instance, you can run CFML inside of an Ant job. And on top of the OSGI-based implementation, Lucy modular concept of extensions. So you can write external extensions you can install into Lucy Server. So that's why that's important. If Lucy doesn't support a feature but Adobe does, and for some reason it's really important to you, you can write that as an add-on to the server, or you can pay someone to write it for you. I've written extensions for Lucy, such as the ability to store session data in a couch-based cluster. Right, that's something that's pluggable in Lucy, and now as of Adobe ColdFusion 2016, but they only supported Redis. So I don't want to get too far off in those weeds, but yeah, that's kind of the history of the CFML engines. So I spend a lot of time working with both. All of my personal things run on the Lucy server, mostly because I'm not going to pay money to run a blog, if that makes any sense. I love CFML, and I work with a lot of clients who use Adobe ColdFusion. But for my blog right here, like Coders Revolution, this is running on Lucy server. I'm just hosting this out on a cheap VPS. I also have a website that I just threw up here on pi.bradwood.com. This is actually running off of a Raspberry Pi that's on my desk over here behind my laptop. And as long as my internet at home is up, this site is up. So, I mean, this is running Lucy server. This runs the Content Box CMS, which is built on top of the ColdBox MVC. You can see live memory stats and CPU stats. What this does make people want to do is mash the F5 key, which is why I had this little limiter that says you're making requests too fast. I posted this on Reddit when I first made it, and a bunch of people tried to crash it because they're jerks. So I put that rate limiter on, and they couldn't crash it. It was pretty funny. If you go to here, I actually have some blog posts on here that talk about doing hardware automation with CFML on Raspberry Pis. If any of you guys are into maker stuff, I have a hat that I wore around to ColdFusion conferences for a year, but it had little blinking LEDs on it, and it was all Power Fusion on a Raspberry Pi using Command Box. So CFML has turned into a lot more of a general purpose programming language than it started as, which was just really purely for web-based stuff. So I can throw you guys some links after this. If any of you guys want to look at the open source Lucy server, it's here at lucy.org, and it's spelled Lucee. They spelled it funny so that way it wouldn't conflict with all the other things called Lucy on Google, because nobody else had anything spelled like that. But I've been helping out with Lucy for quite a while. I've actually submitted a little bit of code, not a great deal, but a little bit here and there. So let's talk about CFML. But first, I want to introduce you guys to Command Box. So Command Box is a CLI, REPL, a package manager, and has the ability to start servers, Cold Fusion servers, both Adobe and Lucy server. Command Box is a native binary. It runs on Windows, it runs on Mac, it runs on Linux. We have RPM packages, we have Debian packages. We even have versions that come with the JRE if you don't have Java installed on your machine. But for the most part, all you have to do is just have, Java installed on your computer. And I have, nope, not there. I have, I don't know if you guys can see this. It may be too small. I can't make it bigger. Oh, look, I can make it a bit bigger. Wow, that's really big. So right here, I just have box.exe. That's really all Command Box is. It's just a binary. So if you ever used any other CLI tool like Git or Ant, right, it's just a binary. You stick it in your Windows system path. So Command Box, let's see if we can change over to Sandbox. Folder here. Okay, so this is Command Box right here. It has two ways you can run it. You can run it from your existing shell. If you're on Unix-based operating system, it's probably going to be Bash. If you're on Windows, it's probably going to be DOS or maybe PowerShell. You can run one-off commands like you do with Git, where you run, Git push, something like that. And so the command runs and it exits back to your native shell. Command Box also is a little unique in that it has an interactive shell, as I call it. And that's the blinking cursor you see here. This is Command Box's own prompt. This allows Command Box to do its own color coding. So you see, as I'm typing this Coldbox create app, it's turning it yellow because it's the name of a command. So you can do your own. It has its own color code and it has its own tab completion that shows me help on the things I can do. And then it also, I guess those really are the big things, but I get to control the prompt as well. So this, I don't know if any of you guys are familiar with any of the Powerline shells. This little prompt right here shows me the time of day, shows me the version, it shows me the name of the folder I'm in. This is a ripoff of Bullet Train, which if any of you guys are Mac users, you've probably seen someone using Bullet Train. It's a plugin to iTerm, which is a console replacement in Mac. This is basically a version of a Powerline shell, which was popular with the Ubuntu guys. So it's a module that I have installed in Command Box. It's pretty handy. So as far as the language, how many of you guys know what a REPL is? R-E-P-L? Yep. All right. REPL just means read, evaluate, print, loop. And most languages, finally, Java got one themselves. It's about time they joined the modern world. Most languages have a REPL, which is just a command prompt to run one-off lines of code without having to put them into a file or compile them or save them. Just here's a line of code, run it. So I talked about Cold Fusion's sort of tag syntax. That's what I first learned with Cold Fusion, back in 2000. Since then, Cold Fusion, quite some time ago now, also has really two syntaxes. It has the tags, which I really only use if I'm templating in HTML, because that's what they were designed for. And it has a scripting language, which looks and reads pretty much like JavaScript or C would. Cold Fusion is loosely typed. That means you don't have to declare a type when you declare a variable. So if I want to, create a variable called myString and set it equal to Brad, then that's fine, right? But I didn't have to tell CFML that my string was a string. In fact, if I wanted to be evil, I could set my string equal to the number 42. Cold Fusion doesn't really care, right? The variables are typeless. Now, CFML does have a concept of typing, and it can coerce types. So if I set my string equal to 42 in quotes, it truly is a string. But if I want to do, my string plus 5, it'll still coerce it back into an integer to do math upon it. So CFML allows you to be very loose when you declare variables, but as long as it can coerce that variable into the type it needs, especially things like dates, right? It'll do that automatically. CFML is also what's known as a dynamic language, as opposed to a static language like Java would be. JavaScript is a dynamic language. This means that I can modify classes at runtime. I can add methods into classes at runtime. I can change things on the fly. I can call methods that don't exist on a class, and I can handle those dynamically with onMissing method. That allows for some really powerful, chainable DSLs where you can actually the method name. If any of you guys have done any work with Grails, which is the Groovy framework, they do similar stuff with their GORM, their dynamic finders. So setting variables looks as you would expect. If statements are the same, if condition, right, then echo, oops, yes, hard to type. Let's go, no, right. Of course, that goes yes. So the script syntax pretty much looks like what you've probably seen with JavaScript, and similar to Java, just a lot lighter weight. The main data structures, we have strings and we have integers, obviously. The other native data types, we have our arrays. So if I created an array called fruits, I can do fruit append, and I can add items into this array. So I can say add an apple to the array. Oops, I misspelled it. Fruits, there we go. Fruits.append, apple. I can add orange and banana. Right? Ooh, bananas. So you can interact with these just like that, with appending these things to it. Then we can do things like, fruits first. We can grab the, oops, a typo. But again, fruits first, right? I can grab the first, oh, hold on. I exited out of the REPL. Sorry about that. Hit Control-C when I did that typo and it exited out of the REPL entirely. Let me just go back and rerun these. I'm just using the history from the REPL. What was the other one I had? Apple. There we go. So let's try this again now. Finally, so fruit up first. Grab the first item out of the array. And loops look pretty familiar as well. For var, I don't even need var here. Fruit and fruits. I can also do multi-line here. I can echo out fruit. The word's starting to look weird. Did I even spell it right? I did not put any spaces or line breaks. You just have orange, banana, apple, right? So the looping constructs are pretty much what you'd expect. CFML is what is known as a multi-paradigmed language, which is a really, really fancy way of saying it supports multiple different styles of languages. You have your typical procedural languages, which is just, the old school legacy, each line of code is just run top to bottom in a file, right? That would be what like a CFM file would be. Cold Fusion is also object-oriented. It's classical object orientation, so it's pretty similar to Java. You have your typical, extends, implementing interfaces, overriding, methods and parent classes. It supports the basic polymorphism you'd expect from a language like Java. What Cold Fusion doesn't do, even though we've started to add some of these features, is get too far off in the weeds. Java really gets technical with, final declarations and abstract classes, and some of that stuff. CFML, for the most part, its goal is to stay simple and allow you to build things quickly. So it doesn't get too far off in the weeds of that, but it does support all your basic object-oriented structures. CFML is also useful for functional programming. And functional programming, I don't know if you guys are familiar with that phrase. Anybody heard that, functional programming? Yeah, I mean, that's like the new hotness now, right? JavaScript, all the JVM languages, Node, all about the functions. And somebody explained this to me the other day like this, and it made a lot of sense. In object-oriented programming, the unit of reuse is an object, a class instance, right? In functional programming, the unit of reuse is a function. which made a lot more sense when I heard that. So functions in CFML are first class citizens. I can create a variable called funct, and I can create an anonymous function, a lambda, a closure, whichever one of the 37 ways you've heard this called. And yes, I realize there are slight differences between all of those. Oops, echo. All right, did I type that right? There we go. So I don't think I did that right. Yeah. No, I did it right. I just questioned myself. So whenever I'm typing on the fly, I figure I'm always going to screw something up. So here I created a variable called funct, which was equal to a function. A function is a data type. It's a variable you can pass around this functional reference. And CFML has always supported this, even though it didn't always support closures. So this is a function that simply echoes out the text, my funct. And then I call the function down here below. So this is a very powerful construct, and this allows you to do what's called higher order functions. And a higher order function is a function that takes another function. I won't demo that right now because that sounds confusing. But basically, to put it this way, all of the modern things people are doing in other languages, we do them in CFML as well. And you notice I haven't touched a single tag yet because I rarely do any coding in tags. Most of the coding I'll do is the scripting. So a lot of the higher order kind of built-in functions. Oh, I didn't talk about structs yet. Most languages in JavaScript, they called objects. In Java, they call them maps. In Cold Fusion, we call them structs, which I think we stole from C or C++. So if I was to create, curly braces, actually, let's just simplify this and do person, right? I'm going to create a variable called person, and I'm going to give it some keys. So it's going to have, name, Brad, age, right? So we call this a struct. Same thing. It's an associative array. It's a series of key value pairs, right? Name, Brad, age, 38. And so, you deal with these just like your, existing, just like you expect person.name, person.age. We also have built-in member functions in these data types, like a person key array will output an array that shows me all the keys in that struct, name, age, right? Or person, I think value array should work the same way. I lied. That one doesn't exist. I must have seen that one in another library. So that's what structs are. And the array, the kind of indexed value, and the associative array, a name value pair, are pretty much kind of bread and butter constructs in most languages. So I'm trying to see if I can do this in a readable format from the REPL here. If I, well, let's just use my fruits one. I still have my fruits array here, don't I? Yeah, I do, fruits. So we can do things like this, right? So for each is a member function on an array. And into this, we can pass a closure that says for each of the fruit in the array, and this is going to look really similar to what I did before, echo out the name of the fruit, and just to use another member function, we're going to reverse that, right? So strings also have their own member functions, like reverse. Oh, it's just each. What happens when I go between languages, I confuse things. So in this instance, we take an array and we call its each function, and we say, here's a function, right? A closure, if you will. Run this function for every item that you had in the array. The function receives the item in as I, and then it echoes out I after reversing it. This is typical functional programming that you see a ton in JavaScript. Java 8 has gotten into this now with lambdas. Kotlin, a lot of the other languages do this. And so all that kind of stuff is supported. There's a bunch of top-level functions in Cold Fusion, but I won't necessarily go into those. If you guys are CFML devs or you want to take a poke at stuff, check out cfdocs.org. This is a community site. Pete Freitag does this. He's a great guy. And you can come in here and you can search for all the functions or the script equivalents in CFML. For any of you guys who haven't done CFML, one of CFML's kind of giant features, which I still think holds true today, is it's a great integration layer because it integrates with everything and it does a ton of stuff out of the box. So by integration, what I mean is I can connect to any ODBC, JDBC data source. It can send mail. It can integrate with FTP servers, Exchange servers. It can make Excel files. It can make PDFs. It can manipulate images. It can read and write files. It has a ton of math functions, a ton of string functions, array functions. All this stuff just kind of like out of, oh, ORM. It has Hibernate built in, and it's like way easier to use than it is in Java because there's no XML because XML sucks, right? And this is all stuff that comes out of the box. You install a CFML engine, whether it's Adobe or Lucy server, and you get all this functionality day one. You can replicate this in other languages, but at what cost, right? I mean, Node does all this. You need to install like 37,000 modules in Node to get it to do all this. Java does this, but you'd need to install like, 5,800 jars, which is essentially what ColdFusion is. I mean, it's like a giant package of open source libraries all wrapped up with this language put on top of it. So the CF doc site is a nice place to see. This is not the official documentation from Adobe, but I think in some ways it's actually better. It even has, what's an example of a, I'm trying to think of a function I could search for that would have a runnable example. Jeez, I suck. I can't think of anything. What if Query New has one? And here we go. So this even has an integration where you can come in and you can run code live on the CF Docs website. So here's an example of a Query New, creates a new query object, right? And so there's runnable code. This actually uses a really cool site called trycf.com, which Abram Adams runs. And you can come in here, and if I like just, dump out the server scope, what's it complaining about?
Probably don't want you knowing their server implementation information.
What's that?
They probably don't want you knowing their server implementation information.
No, I've done this before. I use the site all the time. This might be a bug. I might need to yell at Abram and tell him to restart. He has this hosted on Linode on some Docker containers, and sometimes they get hung up. I message him like, hey, you need to restart it. But TryCF is pretty cool. It is locked down, right? You can't read and write local files. You can't do certain things for obvious reasons of security. But you can pretty much experiment with any ColdFusion code, and you can choose what server you want to run it on. Lucy 5, Lucy 4, Rilo 4, Adobe ColdFusion 2016, 11.10, right? So you can dial in a ColdFusion version. And just for the sake of example, if I try to run this in Adobe ColdFusion, it's not going to work. And there's two reasons. The first one is Lucy supports a dump function, which is a shortcut for write dump. And the second reason it won't run is, oh, I forgot. They don't require the semicolon. Adobe generally requires semicolons. I forgot write dump is one of the like 2 exceptions for some weird reason. Their parser will let you get away without it. Lucy allows you to leave off semicolons. You'll notice all the stuff I did at the REPL didn't have any semicolons at all because I like to leave them off when I can. But TryCF is a pretty cool example. Okay, so we've covered the language. We've covered some basic stuff. Let's talk about ForgeBox. One of the tenets of modern development languages or modern programming languages is package management. In Java, we have Maven, and Node, we have npmjs.org, and Python, we have pip, in Ruby, we have gems, right? Everybody has their package management. So in CFML, the website where you can kind of post packages for the internet to see is forgebox.io. In fact, we were just talking this morning about a project on here called QB. This is a nice little query builder that allows you to, build queries in a nice little kind of chainable, syntax, query.from.orderby.select, right? This is just a little ColdFusion library. You see all these examples are in script because that's how we write apps these days, are in script. And you can drop this into your application. So if I wanted to use this this project, we see all I have to type is install QB. And that's something we run over here in command box. So I'm sitting here in this empty directory. If I type install QB, it goes out, it grabs the code, it clones it off of GitHub, and now you can see. Let me just open up this folder. Now we have a modules folder, we have a QB folder, and here's the module installed into my application, ready to use. There's a second thing that happened is there's now a box.json. If any of you guys have done anything with Node, this is your package JSON. If you've done anything in Java, this is your pom.xml, right? This is your package descriptor. It tells you what dependencies the package has and where they're installed to. And it can actually track a lot more than that. If I go ahead and I run the init command, I'm not going to initialize this. It's just like a fresh package. So we have, the name of the package, the version, the offer, the location, all these different keywords about it. The dependencies are right here again. Package scripts. This was mostly ripped off of NPM. So if you've done anything with Node, this would be very familiar with you. Even the integrations with your test box test, right? So that's all there in your package descriptor, your box.json. And you can interact with that from the command line. Oops, package. So I should use tab completion. It's better than me typing. You can interact with this from the command line. You can do things like, package, package set name equals Brad. So now if I look, it's modified the JSON, it's changed the name to be Brad. There's CLI commands to modify all these JSON files. That way you can automate stuff, and you can do it programmatically. So the way you interact with third-party modules is through the package manager. You'll notice that inside of the QB folder, hope this is big enough you can see it. I don't know what it looks like on your screen. There's also a box.json. That's because every package gets its own box.json, right? Every folder with code that's a unit, an atomic unit of code, a package, has a box.json. So you can see, this one is called QB. It's version 5.1.2. We use the semantic versioning, NPM style. Eric Peterson's the author. You can see all that it runs. And so the package management built inside of here also resolves nested dependencies. So if I'm working with a Coldbox application and I want to use the CBORM module, which gives you some kind of Grail styles wrapper on the Hibernate implementation, I can install CBORM. And you'll see this installs more than CBORM. It actually installs CB validation and CB I18N, which is the internationalization, right? So these are all dependent modules. CBORM required validation, which required CB I18N. And the package manager goes and resolves that dependency hierarchy for you. And I just closed it, but let's open it back up. If we go back up to our folders, we'll see this now, CBORM folder. It has its own modules folder, which has CB validation, which has its own modules folder, which has CB I18N. And there's a box.json at every single one of these levels. These are all separate packages. So here's the beauty. Come all the way back to my top level. I blow away my entire modules folder, right? Because you don't commit these kind of things to your source control. These are all get ignored. But my box.json remains. And this is the descriptor. This tells me that this package requires QB, requires CBORM. So first day on the job, you clone the repo. You get this. What do? You come in, you run install without any parameters. This looks at the box.json, reinstalls everything the application needs. So now it's all back. Here's my modules folder back. Everything's been put back in place for me. So all the third-party packages that come from remote locations, ForgeBox, even directly from GitHub, HTTP, endpoints, those are all managed by the package manager, which is command box. It can install them. It can also tell you what you have installed. Here's a nice little pretty list of what I have. I can ask if any of them are outdated, right? It says they're not outdated, and I can ask it to be a bit more verbose about that. So it actually goes and checks ForgeBox and says, has any of the versions been updated for these, right? And if I force, oops, let me learn how to type. If I force one of these to look out of date, right? Like I'll come in here and manually edit my box.json and I'll say it's 5.0, right? So now if I come and I say update, it'll be like, hey, look, there's a new version of Query Builder available, right? 5.1.2, do you want to update it? I say yes, it installs it. Now I'm up to date, right? So that's what your package manager does for you. It manages all of those. Okay, there's like a million other things for package management. I'm going to skip them for now. You can also create packages and you can publish them to ForgeBox all from the command line, right? The next thing command box does for you as a CFML developer is scaffolding. If you want to create an app, it does that. So if I want to create an MVC application, I can say, oops, I'm typing it backwards. I can say Coldbox create app. I'm giving it a name, my app, right? So this just dumped into the folder all the files and folders that I need to have a working MVC application, right? So we have, the Coldbox framework has been installed for me automatically. And of course, that has also been, reflected here. We also have, I don't know if any of you guys are familiar with Coldbox. If you're familiar with any other MVC applications, it's the same basic stuff. You have a views folder where your views go. You have a models folder where your models go. We call controllers handlers. That's the C part of your MVC, right? Here's your handlers. And there's other stuff in here, but it doesn't really matter. So
Is this,
go on.
is this what CF Wheels became? Or
No, CF Wheels is a separate product. Trying to figure the guy who does that. CF Wheels is another MVC framework that was modeled after Ruby on Rails.
Yeah.
And so they called it CF Wheels. It is similar, though not as comprehensive as CommandBox. I'm sorry, as ColdBox. CF Wheels has written their own integration into CommandBox where you can install CF Wheels commands, and they have a whole bunch of the same things that Ruby on Rails does.
Okay.
Let's see. Let's look for it. ForgeBox search.
It hasn't been updated in like forever. So
they actually came out with a new video series like 2 or 3 days ago. Somebody was making some.
Cool.
Yeah, I just saw it. Yeah, they've so what we did. So Forge, everything that ends in box, which is from like 1992. Everything that ends in box in the Cold Fusion world is basically a product that my company has made. It's kind of a theme. Everything ends in box: log box, cache box, test box, mock box, command box, content box. You name it. We have like a box for everything. It's sort of like a joke. But we aim to support the entire community. So CF Wheels, by all rights, is a competing framework, but that's fine. They're still part of the CFML community. They still use ForgeBox to host their packages. They use CommandBox to make their own CLIs. It's not exclusive in that regard. As you can see, CF Wheels has a bunch of projects out there on ForgeBox. I'm trying to find their, here we go, CF Wheels CLI commands. Oh, Tom King, that's the guy. I feel bad I forgot his name. So these are called CF Wheels CLI. So I don't think I've ever actually installed these, even though I've helped them write them. So I can install the CF Wheels integration, and let's hit help here. Wow, this is kind of janky since my text is so large. The default help, let's just use the help command because it'll make it a little bit better. Okay, here we go. So it adds a wheels namespace. So if I do wheels help, then yeah, it's got wheels DB, wheels migrate, wheels generate. Yeah, so he has a whole bunch. Wheels destroy. I've never used any of these, but yeah, the CF Wheels framework has its own kind of thing. It's pretty cool. The framework one framework. Tony Junks also made some commands in CommandBox as well for scaffolding. So I'm gonna get back to the MVC, but I'm gonna jump ahead to what turned out to be the most popular thing that the CLI tool does. Is it also starts servers, and it's like really, really easy. So if I want to start a server in the current directory, I just type server start and hit enter. And I don't need to have anything else on this computer, like literally nothing. I don't need an IIS, I don't need Apache, I don't need Lucy, I need Adobe, I don't need, all you need is Java and CommandBox, and you can start a server in any directory you want. You can actually start as many servers as you want, running as many versions of Adobe and Lucy as you want, all at the same time, with nothing installed. It works really great. In fact, I did a presentation at CF Summit 2 years ago on this, and my laptop wouldn't work on the HDMI plugin they had. I did the entire presentation on somebody else's laptop, and all I needed to do was grab the CommandBox binary. I didn't need anything else installed. So it opens the browser for you. I wish you guys could see it. There's an icon on my system tray right now that got added. Here, we'll do this old school. This is Microsoft Paint. I just did a screenshot. Hey, look, there's you guys. I can see you. So right here. So here's my system tray, and it's really pixelated because I blew it up like crazy. But here's the little Lucy icon because I started a Lucy server and has a little CommandBox logo overlaid on it. When I click on that, there's a menu that pops up. I can start the server. I can open up the administrator. In fact, let's do that right now. Open server admin. Right. So this is like a full-fledged Lucy server, just as though I had installed it. You can add data sources, you can add mappings, and of course, if I started an Adobe Cold Fusion server, you would be seeing the familiar Adobe Cold Fusion administrator. A lot of people are starting to use CommandBox now for local development, and now with my server started, you see my little bullet train is updated to show the version of Lucy and the fact that it's running. What people can do nowadays is their entire development team doesn't have to worry about like maintaining and keeping in sync a Cold Fusion installation between 5, 10, 15 people. They all just use CommandBox to start their servers. And there's a new file here that came when I created my app. It's called server.json. If I run server show, you can see it. The only thing in it right now is it's set rewrites to be enabled. What that means is if I I don't know if you can see the URL, but I can hit, 127001. It picked a random port for me because I didn't tell it a port. That's how it doesn't conflict with other servers. And then just /main, right? So the rewrites add that index.cfm back in, so you get those nice, pretty search engine safe URLs, right? Command box does all that out of the box. So the server.json allows me to configure, like all this stuff. I just hit tab, and this is the tab completion of a server set command. So, I mean, you can set the HTTP ports you want, HTTPS ports, SSL search. You can do rewrites. You can do basic auth. You can do AJP listeners. You can control wherever the browser opens up. You can turn on directory browsing. You can change the version of Java. You can set custom error pages. You can customize the tray icon, right? You can actually add menu items into the menu that pops up when you click the tray icon, like custom menu items that do whatever you want. You can set the JVM arguments, you can set the heap size, and of course you can set the ColdFusion engine you want to use. Adobe ColdFusion 9, 10, 11, Lucy, right? So what people do nowadays is they wrap their application up, and between their box.json, which says all the dependencies the application needs, all the third-party stuff that needs installed, and between the server.json, which says this is how I want the server started, the port I want it to run on, the amount of memory I want it to have, the JVM args that need to be present, anybody, any new employee on the first day can just grab the command box binary, git clone the repo, right? Run box install, box server start, boom. You have like a running application, right? And they haven't installed anything in the machine other than the command box binary. Now, I don't know if I want to go down that trail yet. I'll come back to cfconfig. There's one piece I left off. There's one additional JSON file I didn't mention, and that is everything that goes in the administrator, your actual data sources, your CF mappings, your settings, right? There's a way to automate that. There's more. But let me get back to the cold box just to poke at this a little bit. Now, there's a few frameworks. Cold box is sort of the biggest. Really simple, just to take a super brief look at how cold box works. If I wanted to add a new handler, there's more scaffolding commands. Cold box create handler. Oops, I meant to run the help on that. Geez, this looks crazy when I have the text all blown up because the lines wrap. So there's built-in help for all these commands that shows you what all the parameters are, what they do. So if I want to create a handler, Brad, and I'm going to give it an index and a foobar action, right? This scaffolds out several files for me. It creates a view for me in the views folder. It creates the actual, there's two views, one for each action. It creates the handler, which is the same as the controller, brad.cfc. And it also creates integration testing. Whoa, what's up with that? Yes, because we like to push testing. In fact, I don't think I have testbox installed. No, but I can. If I install testbox and tell it to save that as development dependency. Oh, I typed install twice. What was I thinking? Let's try that again. There we go. With testbox installed, I can actually hit tests/runner.cfm, I think is our default location. Nope, I failed. Let me look and see what it is. Test folder. Runner.cfm. See, I must have typed it wrong. Oh, it's telling me that it's not finding testbox. Let me see if I actually installed testbox correctly. I don't think I did. I don't see testbox in this. Did I not install testbox up here? What happened? Oh, jeez. Yeah. That's what I did. When I typed install twice, I meant to type install testbox. There we go. Now testbox is installed. It was not earlier. Now let's see if it actually works. Yay. All right, so this is the HTML output of the tests. The default test that came with the app pass, whenever we scaffold out tests for you, when you create handlers, we make them fail on purpose, and that's so you don't forget to write your own tests. So you literally see the test says expect false to be true. These are BDD style tests, by the way. If you guys have done anything with like Jasmine and JavaScript, if I go edit test specs integration Brad test, This will open up, edit is a nice little handy command that'll open up files in your editor. Do I need to make this font size bigger? I didn't think about doing that ahead of time. Editor, oh geez. I'm using CF Builder and it makes it really hard to do this. I started using VS Code, by the way. I don't know what IDEs you guys use. There's CFML packages. So CF Builder is Adobe's thing, right? You pay them for it. It's built on Eclipse. It's okay. It's bulky and it's slow. Sublime has a lot of Cold Fusion users. It's really popular. There's also CFML packages. There's also Coldbox and Testbox packages for Sublime. VS Code has been like really popular lately. It just came out. It's different than Visual Studio. It's like written in Electron. It's super fast. I have it on my laptop. There's already Cold Fusion libraries for it, as well as integrations with Command Box and all this other stuff. But this is my test. I'm not going to get into testing. That's like a whole hour-and-a-half presentation of its own. But as you can see, we're using the script syntax, right? Not a tag to be seen. And these are all closures. These are all functions, nested functions we're passing in that declares this. So here, this expect false to be true. We make these fail by default. So I'm going to do a really, really dirty thing, and I'm going to make my test pass by just changing it to say expect true to be true, and that'll totally make my test pass. Totally cheating, but hey.
So, Brad, do you have to have Codebox installed to run these tests?
Absolutely not. So Testbox is a standalone library and can be used on any Cold Fusion application, right? It happens to have some really nice integrations with Coldbox and the Coldbox scaffolding commands in Command Box. We generate tests for you, but Testbox is a total standalone thing. So there's no requirement to be using any other box library. And a lot of people who use Testbox aren't using anything else. Let's see if this works. Hey, so I just ran a command. I'm going to zoom out a little bit, called testbox run. This allows me to do the same thing I did from my browser right here, which is run my unit tests or my integration tests from the command line. So I type testbox run. It hits that via, it hits that HTTP URL, and I get a nice little formatted response. In fact, I'm going to go back and make one of my tests fail, just so you can see what that looks like. Run testbox run again. So here you see now my, foobar test has a failure, expected false to be true. So now it's turned some stuff red. It's got some, information on it. What's nice about the testbox run command is it actually returns the proper exit code from the command box binary. So what that means is if you're having continuous integration set up in Travis CI or Jenkins or Bamboo or GitLab pipelines, whatever, Bitbucket, any of that nonsense, you want to run your test. All your tests need to do is clone the repo, box install, box server start, test box run. And the test will fail if any of the tests fail, because the exit code will come back as 1. You don't have to have a bunch of plumbing to get to get Cold Fusion or Lucy, installed and up and running. You just have to clone the repo, use the CLI to spin everything up, and run your tests from the command line. It's really nice. And then the output, when your Travis CI logs, your Jenkins logs, is all going to be, ASCII text output. So Testbox is fun, and like I got off on this sidetrack because I had generated that handler, and we automatically create tests for you. So if I take a quick look at that handler I created, brad.cfc, controllers are just represented as a CFC file in Coldbox. I'm going to get rid of some of these comments. We put a bunch of default stuff in here that's optional. Really, this is just to like boil this down to the bare minimum. This is my Brad handler. This is all it is, right? So the handler or controller itself is a component. And, for any of you, people that are more familiar with tags, this is the same as your CF component tag, your Indian CF component tag. My functions are the same as CF function name equals index, right? Just the script version. So the actions or the individual pages you hit in the site are just simply declared as functions. So I have a function called foobar in my Brad handler. Let's actually go and hit this. I hear a question.
Is component like a namespace or something?
I'm sorry?
Is component like a namespace or like a class? What is component?
Component is the keyword used in CFML to declare a class.
Okay, so it's class.
Yeah, so what you typically see, oops, where might you go? What you typically see in a language like Java or something would be, the word class. In Cold Fusion, CFCs came out in version 6 which was Macromedia's first version in 2002. And at the time, they called them Cold Fusion Components, which is where the acronym CFC comes from. But yeah, component is just simply a class declaration. And if I extended, something else, I would have, extends com.foo.bar. If I was implementing an interface, it would be, com.foo.i bar, whatever, right? It's just it's the same kind of syntax that you're familiar with. Good question. All right, so I have an action here called foobar, and what that translates to is this little default Coldbox app shows you a list of all the handlers you created just as a convenience. It also shows me the modules I've installed. So if I go hit my Brad handler, I can take off the index.cfm because I have rewrites enabled, so I don't need that. I'm hitting by default index. That's one of our conventions. And if I do Brad/foobar, I'm now hitting the foobar action. So if you're wondering where is the HTML from this coming from, because my handler doesn't really do anything. All it says is use this view. That's all it's doing, right? So let's open this up. So in my views folder, we've created a Brad folder, and there's a foobar.cfm. You can name these whatever you want, but by convention, we like to keep the folder the same name as the handler and the file the same name as the action because, let's be honest, it's easier to find stuff. And here's that actual output. Header1 brad.foobar. It's just the default. So if I'm like, this is my foobar action, right? I can update that, go over here, whack F5, and that's updating. So you might be thinking, well, this is a very small amount of HTML. What's up with these menus that are happening on here? Right, that comes from the default layout. So out of the box, of course, everything's configurable. We have a layouts folder, and the Coldbox framework is going to look for a file called main.cfm, and if it finds it, it's going to use that automatically. If we look in here, this is the default HTML. It's got our actual, HTML tag, the head tag. JavaScript includes. It's got the body. Whatever you want to wrap all of the views in your site, you define here, right? All the way down to the end of the page. So right here, we had this render view call. That's what goes out, renders the actual view right here, and sticks that HTML right inside of that. And if you view source, you'll see that's, exactly what you see. If I scroll down, here we go. So that div class container, and then boom, here's the contents of my view dumped in the middle, and then we have the rest of the layout. So layouts are a first-class citizen of the Coldbox framework, and you can have as many layouts as you want, and they can have whatever JavaScript, CSS you want to wrap your views. And it's pretty much all found by convention. That's one of the big things in Coldbox, is it was the first convention over configuration framework in the CFML space. All the frameworks prior to that required you to use a bunch of XML and declare in a very kind of verbose syntax all the files you're going to have and the URL routes and how you wanted them to map. Coldbox is purely convention-based. The fact that I created a CFC called Brad and I stuck it in the handlers folder is enough for Coldbox to say, hey, look, cool, there's a thing called Brad here. If anybody asks for a handler called Brad, I know where that is because it's in my little convention folder, right? Same thing with, layouts. The fact that there's a file in here called main was enough for Coldbox to go, hey, cool, look, there's the main layout. I'm just going to use that. I don't need to be configured to use that automatically. And these URL routes in here, I'm hitting my site, :port, I have /brad/foobar. The default URL routes in Coldbox is, all right, well, the first word must be the name of the handler, and the second word must be the name of the action. That's just how it works out of the box. You don't need to do any configuration for that to happen. And I'm still amazed how many frameworks out there, like in the Java space, like Scala, for instance, don't have these basic conventions. You have to like manually configure every single route you want to use, which really just gets pretty verbose. But there's a lot of conventions there. So unless you guys want to see anything else specifically about Coldbox, we can
on the M side. So
yeah.
Is this implementing any kind of like ORM in the background? Do you have like active record available to you and something?
Yeah, all that's available. I'm just not using any of it. So that CBORM module that I installed earlier,
yeah.
This is not a requirement to use Cold Fusion's built-in ORM, but it makes it way, way nicer. It has a collection of virtual entity services that have a ton of just really helper methods to be able to search and find and list and sort and get them back as a query or get them back as an array of objects. And so all the work that we do with ORM, we use the CBORM module because it just makes it way nicer. I don't actually have any M's at all on this app right now. This is just a V and a C app at this point. We do have active record. It's part of the CBRM module. It works pretty much like Ruby does. You know, you create the thing, you tell it to save itself. Here, I can create a really quick model if you want to see it go full circle. I'll use my...
So it's all just entities in the background, though, because you're using CBORM.
I'll create a non-ORM model, just a basic service, so that wouldn't have to worry about having a database or anything, just for the sake of this example. So
Sure.
if I create something called my service, and I'm going to give it a method called, actually, I'm going to make sure I'm doing these in the right order. Yeah, methods. Called do something, and actually, let me look at the help on this. Persistence, yes. So make it a singleton. Actually, you know what? I can add open onto this, and it'll automatically open in my editor when it's done, which is kind of nice. All right, so that'll create a service real quick, and we'll plug it in. So it also created a test for us, of course, because that's what it does. So here's my service. Super simple, right? We have a class definition. Accessors equals true is part of the CFML language, and this is actually a pretty cool feature. If I have a property name is my prop, come on. We can give it a type if we want to say it's a string, right? So here I have a property. So if I have an instance of my service, I'm just going to type down here below. If I have an instance of my service is created, I can automatically do set my prop and give it a value, and I can also do get my prop to get that value back. There is no get my prop or set my prop function declared in the service, but because I have accessors equal to true, the CF engine will automatically generate dynamically these methods on the fly for me. So if I had 15 properties, which is more likely in a bean that's saving state, a transient, not a singleton. But if I had 15 properties, I wouldn't have to write 30 boilerplate methods like you would in Java to have a getter and a setter for every single one. I can tell the CFML engine accessors equals true, and stuff like set my prop, get my prop automatically works. Nice time saver in the language. Singleton is not part of the core CFML language. This is an annotation that the dependency injection framework called Wirebox uses. I would need another hour and a half to talk about what dependency injection is. If you don't know what it is, it's a framework that creates CFC instances for you. And since I'm using Coldbox, Wirebox is just kind of built in. So let me give a quick implementation here. Let's return hello world. Right, so there we go. So singleton basically means that only one instance of my service will ever be created. No matter how many times I ask for it, there will always only be one my service. That's what singleton does.
Hey, sorry to interrupt you. We actually have someone who's about to jump out of the room, but they had a couple questions. Would you mind?
Please ask.
Okay. Earlier you had said that the database drivers was actually one of Adobe's money makers. Are there the open source versions for Postgres, MySQL?
Yeah, that's not quite what I said. What I said is that Adobe packages a commercial JDBC driver by a company called DataDirect, which you could not just go download for free off the internet. You would have to pay for those. But they come out of the box with Adobe, which is one of the reasons you pay for Adobe Cold Fusion. Now, that said, there are free and open source JDBC drivers for every possible conceivable database, and those do come bundled with Lucy and Adobe. So MySQL, PostgreSQL, Oracle, SQL Server, Hypersonic, H2, Apache Derby, all of those, there's also free versions and you can use those.
Right. You just said the JDBC. So in essence, you have to jump down and use the Java version. So there's wrappers.
No, it's all done seamlessly through CF Query. Just to show you like a quick tag-based example. Are you a CF developer, or is this kind? What's that?
Not in a long time.
Okay, that's cool. So I don't typically do queries and tags, but it actually reads a little nicer. So I'm just gonna borrow this. So this is right. So this is what it looks like to access a database in Cold Fusion, and I'm missing one thing, which is data source equals
MySQL.
IDSN, right? So all of the JDBC nonsense is 110% abstracted for you behind the scenes. Your code does not have to know or care what database this is actually connecting to. Now, the SQL syntax in this case itself may be specific to MySQL or SQL Server if you get away from the, the ISO standard. But this data source name is what maps to something you create in the administrator, and you say, I want a data source called MyDSN, and I want it to point to this Oracle database or this SQL Server database or this MySQL database. And the JDBC implementations are all just a behind the curtain detail you don't really have to bother with. So this will create a variable called myQuery, and I can do, CF loop, query equals myQuery, # to mean we're interpolating a variable as opposed to just evaluate it as a string. Gotta end it. I don't type in tags very much. I do almost all my stuff in script nowadays, right? Right, my column. So I mean, this is all you would have to deal with. You would say, here's some SQL, run it against the database this connects to, throw it into a variable called myQuery, and now I want to loop over it and I want to output columns from it. So the JDBC stuff is just all totally behind the scenes. No one cares.
So how often do you have to jump back down into the Java?
None, never, ever.
Okay.
I never need to.
And the third question is, since Lucy does its own server, one of the big problems here is getting ports opened or accessible.
Like networking ports?
Yeah.
That's irrelevant. I mean, Lucy's just a web server. You tie it to whatever port you want. Want one on port 80? Fine. I mean, usually you stick Lucy behind IIS or Apache or Nginx, and they listen on port 80 and 443 and proxy back on AJP or whatever you want. But
still can be in front of it. That works.
Yeah, I mean, it's like a drop-in replacement for Adobe ColdFusion. It does the same thing in the same manner, using half the same open source Java libraries in the background. The biggest problem government people have is that they have to get it on the right approved lists. If you're curious, command box is on the DoD or whatever the Navy uses. I'm not that involved with the project. I don't know the name of all these freaking lists, but command box has been added from a DoD project we've been doing with the Navy on one of those approved software lists. I don't believe Lucy is, but I know that NASA is using Lucy. I don't know where, but the Mars rover site was written in Rilo originally and then ported over to Lucy. I don't know how they got away with not having it on their approved list, but maybe since it was a public site, they didn't need it. I don't know.
Yeah. So do you recommend, let's say, I know one of the things that we had in our list, there was so much to talk about. Let's say you're doing that Docker type development.
Yeah, we didn't even get to Docker, did we?
Yeah, no, it was a lot to cover. Maybe we'll do a follow-up another time. But if you're doing that type of development locally, let's say, for example, because I know one of our groups, we have a large ColdFusion app on, and it's harder to kind of onboard people because they have to give them a whole sandbox area and all that sort of thing. But if they can run it locally on their machine and then deploy that version to the server, say a dev or test environment or integration environment, is that the way you would recommend, like running maybe Lucy locally on their laptop and then?
I would actually recommend doing it through command box. We can talk about that real quick. All right, let's see if this works. No. Oh, I didn't ring it. Remember caches some things. There we go. So hello world. Here I just finished that little model implementation for us. Let me show that, and I'll be done with this. All right. So in my service, I had to do something function that returns the string hello world. Right. Simple. In my Brad handler, I ask it to inject an instance of the myService singleton. Right. So it's gonna be a variable called myService, and then I call it myService.doSomething, and I set that value into prc.data. And in my view, I have access to prc.data. I output it, and it shows up right here. So that's your model integration.
Cool.
Okay, so yes, so Docker. So everything, and I didn't even get to cfconfig. Geez, there's so much things we could talk about. So command box is like your one-stop shop to start any imaginable ColdFusion application using any version of any server, any settings you want. Like it does it all, right? So with that in mind, we've created Docker images by we, I mean my company, that use command box internally, which therefore means you can deploy any app you want on top of the Docker image, and it uses command box behind the scenes to start the servers. This also means that all the same JSON files you use to configure the dependencies of your application, the details of a server you want to start, and the settings of that server can transfer straight across into the Docker world. And then we also have like a gazillion little environment variables you can set to, customize how you want to enable rewrites or where you want to get the config from, or you can, run it in headless mode where we lock down the administrators so it's nice and secure. You can customize the crap out of it. You can customize the ports it's going to listen on. We support Docker secrets. So we're doing a lot of work with Docker Swarm, though ironically, Docker Swarm seems to be going away now in favor of Kubernetes. But I can create a service in Docker Swarm that's an instance of an image. So usually you would take our command box based image and you would extend it. You would make your own image, that would then pull in your code and your things on top of it. So I can deploy a service based on this Docker image, and I can scale it up, 10, 15 nodes, whatever I want, and just, throws all the containers out there and load balances it between them in the cool way that Docker Swarm does that. But this is all based on command box, which makes it really portable. And if you want to, apply an update to your Cold Fusion site, the whole take the site offline, run the updater, restart the server, make sure it works. That's all a thing of the past in the Docker world. In a Docker container, you're encapsulating not only the code but the settings and even the server itself all in one giant standalone package. And when you want to update from Adobe Cold Fusion 11 update 12 to CF11 update 13, it's just a matter of deploying the new Docker image that's now update 13, and you never even have to run with command box. You'll never need to run another updater again in your life. When you want a new version of Adobe Cold Fusion or Lucy, you just ask command box to get it for you, and the next time you start the server, it'll be running the new version you want. In fact, by default, when I ran my server start command here, it grabbed the latest version of Lucy server because that's what it does by default. So the latest version is 5.2.6. So when Lucy 5.3 comes out, the next time I start the server, we'll just automatically start up on 5.3. You don't even have to install it. You don't even need to update it. You don't even need to think about it. It just does it for you. And so that same technology is what powers the Docker containers. So as far as local development, in most scenarios, I consider Docker to be overkill for local development. It's a lot of work. It's a lot of effort. It requires a lot of things to be installed, and it's got a huge learning curve. And I mean, this is just from my experience doing this myself and seeing a lot of people picking it up. Docker is really, really cool, but if you have 50 developers and you need to get them all running on Docker, that can be a total pain. For all of our projects, with the exception of like one or two, 100% of all of our local development is done purely through command box. So all of our repos for sites, whether it's an internal website or a customer website, we've got a box.json, we've got a server.json, we have a cfconfig.json, which I didn't have a chance to talk about. But that handles all the settings inside the Cold Fusion server, your data sources, your mappings. And so all I need to do to get any site running is to have command box, just the binary, present and ready to run. I do box install, server start, and I'm done. I have a running server. And you can't beat that with a stick. Docker is going to, especially on Windows, you're installing like VirtualBox, so you're going to have all the Docker machine stuff. You're spinning up the Linux VM, you're deploying it all. It's got a lot of stuff to do. So I still consider Docker to be overkill. The couple projects that we do use Docker for local development have a lot of very specific and closely intertwined dependencies. They have Elasticsearch, they have SQL Server, which does run on Docker on Linux now. And they have Cold Fusion apps that all need to come up at the same time. And so while it's possible to have SQL Server installed on the local machine and to have Elasticsearch installed on the local machine, what we use is Docker Compose on those projects. And that allows us to do a Docker Compose up, and then it can start 3 or 4 Docker images that all have SQL Server, Elasticsearch, Cold Fusion, all running at the same time. And in those sort of complex scenarios, the overhead of Docker is kind of worth it. But for just a basic site that you just need to run some Cold Fusion code, you can do everything you need with command box.
Yeah, I agree. That's kind of what we're using it for when we have a few services or dependencies that are all part of this singular app. I had one other question really quickly, and I know we'll probably have to schedule another session to dive deeper into some of these things. But you're pretty plugged into the CFML area. One of the things that we are having problems with using CodeFusion was recruiting.
Yeah.
How does that play out in the world that you see?
Well, I do everything remote, so it's easier when you're pulling from any CodeFusion developer in the world. I worked locally here in Kansas City, where I'm at, about 10 years or so. It just, typical corporate environments. And we would run into some of the similar issues. There's a lot of CF developers in Kansas City. Sprint used CodeFusion. Bayer Health uses it. I don't know if Cerner uses it. AT&T uses it. There's a lot of large companies around here that use it. Oftentimes what we found is we could find people who knew CFML, but they were not advanced developers. They were kind of legacy sticks in the mud who didn't use source control, didn't know what unit testing was, didn't know what continuous integration was. They only had written in tags. This crazy newfangled script stuff confused them. So what we found, great luck, and I'd say we, as my coworkers and I, because I did a lot of the interviewing, is we quit looking for CodeFusion developers, and we just looked for good developers. We could train someone in CFML who was already proficient in another similar language very quickly and easily. I mean, every language has variables, has data types, has loops, has outputs. They didn't need to learn how to program. They just needed to learn the intricacies of how CodeFusion handles some things. So, we had a team of 10 to 15 people, and I think only 3 or 4 people came into that job knowing CodeFusion ahead of time, and I was one of them. But we would, interview Java people, .NET people, Python, even Perl, people that were familiar with, modern tooling, knew what MVC was, were familiar reading script code. And, in a few weeks, we would have them go through like Learn CF in a week, modern CFML in 100 minutes. There's a lynda.com training that's kind of outdated, but it's out there. We would have them go through that and work with the senior developers on the team, and they would have, the details of CodeFusion, mastered in a few weeks to a month, and they would be already working on the project. In our particular case, it took longer to get someone up to speed on the specifics of just our project and how the business models worked than it took to just teach them CodeFusion. So when we stopped trying to find people with prior CodeFusion knowledge and just looked for people who were naturally curious and wanted to learn, we got some really good people for the team. But the trick for us was finding people that were curious and could learn and wanted to learn. And we would advertise, this is what the position is going to be doing. You're going to be learning a new language, so people weren't like, we were tricking them, like, haha, it's CodeFusion, you didn't know. And, we would get a lot of people that, were junior developers, maybe didn't have a lot of experience, but they were interested in learning it. And I think the second aspect to this is, and I don't know what the answer is for you, when I hear people say it's hard to find CodeFusion developers, one of the things I ask them is your CodeFusion shop a shop that somebody would want to work at, right? Are you doing modern things? Are you doing fun things? Are you using source control? Are you using continuous integration? Are you using package managers and modern libraries? Or are you maintaining some legacy, crappy CodeFusion application from 20 years ago? Because nobody wants to work at that latter place. But you'll find almost anybody, even if they don't even know CodeFusion, will be willing to work at a modern shop doing modern things. And I think to some extent, some shops that I talk to have problems finding CodeFusion developers because their shop is not a shop anybody wants to go and work at, right? It's an old school legacy, stick in the mud shop. And so I think it's important that, that you have an inviting place regardless of who you're looking for, but looking for just for developers that can learn things is really good. So what we did, the last place I worked, which worked really well, is we had a super informal interview process. It was really just, we're trying to get to know people and their personality. We had a really simple exercise. We didn't use the word test. It was a CodeFusion application. It was very simple. It was written in ColdBox using all script except for the views, which use some tags. And it was just like a super basic contact manager, add, update, delete, little CRUD thing. We would sit people down and we'd say, we have a couple bugs for you to fix, a little enhancement for you to make, and some open-ended stuff like, make a random enhancement of your own. And we'd say, you can use Google, You can ask questions. You can search online because, hey, I mean, if you worked here, that's exactly how you would do your job. You would Google, you would ask us questions. You know, it's not really a test. It's not about what do you have memorized. You know, just can you look at this code, figure out what it's doing? And we would have people who had never seen a line of Cold Fusion in their life, within 45 minutes to an hour of playing around with this app, would pretty much know what most of it did and had, you know, been able to fix the bugs, make some enhancements. And we would have other people would come in with like 10 years of Cold Fusion experience, and they wanted, you know, to be paid $120,000 because they were senior level, and they didn't even know what half of this stuff was because they were just really super old school and it was all just too new for them. And so the guy we would hire would be the, you know, the junior developer who was able to figure all this out in 45 minutes, and kind of guy that, you know, a month later was like, no problem. He had Cold Fusion under his belt. He was learning the rest of our application. And that's how we hired people. And we worked with a recruiting agency, and we would talk to them a lot about what it was we were looking for and the kind of people we were looking for. And they would help, you know, kind of filter those things down. But that's my main bit of advice is, you know, make sure you have a shop that's worth working at. Learn how to identify people who are naturally curious and like to learn things. You know, when you interview someone and you're like, what's the most recent programming book or article you read and what did you like about it? And they're like, oh, I don't read about programming. Doesn't mean you shouldn't hire them, but they're maybe not a curious person. You know, when people are like, oh, I really like to read Uncle Bob's stuff, his book on clean code really talked to me, right? You're like, okay, you know, this guy likes to learn new things. And those typically are the kind of people that can pick up a new language and can, you know, set into a place. So that's my overall advice on that. If you're willing to allow people to work remotely, there are quite a few CF developers out there. You know, the trick is getting in touch with them. I mean, there's a Facebook group for Cold Fusion. There's a LinkedIn group. There's a Slack team with over 2,000 people in it. There's, you know, several major conferences, Adobe's conference, my company's conference, Into the Box. There's NC DevCon. There's MiraCon. There's CF Camp in Munich. There's a lot of places you can kind of inject yourself in the community to help find people. If your requirement is that they need to be local, then that's not nearly as big of a deal. Though, I mean, you are in the DC area, so I know that that's kind of a hot spot of CF development there. But
I guess the big issue I'm seeing is, so if I take some of the applications that we currently have in our portfolio that are the kind of 20-year-old Cold Fusion legacy application, yep, the process of modernizing them using some of the tools that you showed us today is just as heavy a lift as just, you know, jump and ship to Ruby on Rails. And so at that point,
it's always more work to rewrite in a new language, because you can refactor to it. You can refactor a CFML app to a more modern CFL app piece by piece, right?
I guess so. So you're saying like keep some of the old tag stuff around while I move things into scripts and.
Well, yeah, here's the thing. A lot of projects that I see that try to do a complete rewrite drag on for like a year and a half and then run out of budget, and like they never see the light of day. Yeah. One thing you can do with Coldbox is you can drop Coldbox, and I do this all the time for clients. There's a lot of interest in migrating legacy CFML applications. I can drop a Coldbox, you know, framework inside of the middle of a legacy application, leave all the legacy stuff in place, and just slowly start porting things over. Take it one little chunk at a time. You have a login screen, you know, so you start moving those over to handlers and views. And the way Coldbox is written, we don't force you to put logic in your handlers. You can put all your logic in the views. You can even do implicit view dispatch, where you just take a CFM file, drop it in the views directory, and you hit it directly without even having a handler created for it. And those are all for the express purpose of allowing you to slowly start to move stuff over. You know, I'm working with a company right now that, you know, part of their app is on Coldbox and the rest of it is all still legacy. And they're still using their app in production. Customers don't know the difference, and they're slowly porting stuff over. That project's a lot less likely to run out of budget and steam a year and a half later and get canceled. And then it's all, you know, worked down the drain.
Fair enough.
That's a good point. But Brad, I think we're running out of time for the room.
That's cool.
This has been excellent. We definitely, if we can, maybe do a follow-up. We had quite a few people that weren't here for weather and other reasons. Of course, they'll have the recording, but maybe they have actual hands-on experience type questions as well that they may want to reach out. But this has been excellent. It's really been informative.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Awesome. Yeah, I know it's like a ton of stuff. I could talk for an hour on like everything that I touched today. But that would be great. I don't know if any of your CF guys went to the CF Objective Conference that was last year in DC. It was the National Press Club. But that's not happening this year, unfortunately. So if you guys do want to go to a conference, I will just say one last time that Into the Box is in Houston in April. So
Cool.
You guys can check into that. Actually, speaking of legacy apps, we have like several workshops we're doing, and I'm doing one in Command Box. Our workshop, Zero to Hero, migrating legacy CFML applications to Cold Box, is like completely sold out.
I can imagine why.
There's a lot of people in that boat. You know, they've got stuff that's been around forever, and they're like, we got to keep this current. And so there's a lot of people doing that. So you're not alone.
All right. Well, thanks, Brad. Like you've enlightened my disposition on Profusion.
Awesome. All right. Looking forward to talking to you guys again.
Yeah. Thanks again.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.